as a man, if you said all these kind of things, this is the way I look at it. It's like, here's a checklist. If I am doing this and this and this and this, then I get more sex. Like, no problem. I got that. We'll double down, right? I can get all these things done by 10 p.m. and we are ready to rumble, girl. Like,
yeah.
I think if you can just ask, as a man, right? If you can ask these questions and don't be sneaky or like trying to be manipulative, but come at it literally from the perspective of how do I have a 50-year marriage? Welcome back to The Donkey
And the Bee,
where men are jackasses
and women are biatches.
where we work together to build an extraordinary life.
Tune in to up your game in your marriage, entrepreneurship, and finances. Welcome back to another episode of The Donkey and the Bee with your hosts, Brett and Laura Shakavis, where we talk all things marriage, entrepreneurship, and finances. We talk about the things not a lot of people want to talk about. Finances are one of them. And to be honest, the topic today is very much a topic not many people want to talk about. And that is 3 letters.
Sex.
Yes.
Oh, man.
You're thinking about other 3-letter words, weren't you?
Nope, that was it.
Okay, darn. Okay, that was it.
So we always come at this show from, here's the lessons we want to give to our daughters, right, when they're older. And so a lot of it's about money, right, and financial freedom and planning and all those things. But you know what? Today, this is something that I would want for my future sons-in-laws, right?
Like that.
So we're talking about how to ask for more sex.
Mm-hmm.
I want to come at this from the perspective of the man, the husband, and usually the person in the relationships that wants more sex more often than the woman, right? And there's exceptions, but let's be general here and say, okay, usually speaking, men want more sex. And a lot of times couples are just not on the same page with how frequently we're doing it. And man, you know what? I know a lot of people that, marriages have failed and it's led to, cheating and all these things because of a lack of sex or a disagreement on how are they going to go about these kind of things.
I think it's important to note that a lot of times women in general can forget the way a man is biologically created to be. And that is to spread your semen throughout the world, right? To produce more babies, to keep the population intact. And that's a great thing. Because if women were like that too, there would be an overpopulated earth.
We'd be like bunnies.
Literally, exactly. So there's a reason why I think women don't have as high as a sex drive. Yes, hormonally, I get that. But also because there would be too many people in the world. So I think a lot of times women forget that. They think that men are just like these horn dogs who just want to have sex with anything they think is attractive. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think that this is a good conversation to start to make women aware of the needs that men need. So
to be blunt here, we're saying for ladies, your man is not a dog, right? He is a man. God created him to work and to procreate, right? Like, we're here to make sure the human race stays intact. We are heroes, saviors of the earth.
Oh my goodness. You're not saviors of the earth. Come on now. Don't be ridiculous.
Well, that might be a small stretch.
That is a stretch.
But nonetheless, just because your man is horny all the time and wants a lot of sex, that's the way he's created. Like, biologically, we are here to do that. And so part of the lack of communication that husbands and wives, boyfriends and girlfriends have is the conversation on sex. So I want to talk today about how a man can initiate, and it could be a lady also, but most commonly how a man can initiate having a conversation about sex, and specifically more sex in their relationship. Because we see a lot of times, older couples, and they just don't do it at all anymore, right? Mm-hmm. There's even younger couples that, they don't do it. They are not on the same page. I'm just going to say, usually all the men, they want sex no matter what. And if they are not getting it from their wife, they're going outside of the marriage or they're handling it themselves, right? It's biologically speaking, got to happen. So I think this is an important topic to have some structure and groundwork for here's how a man can have this conversation. And it can go both ways, and a lady can initiate the conversation. But generally, here's how a dude can be like, hey, babe, right? Like, how can we get on the same page with sexual needs and other needs in our relationship?
It's one of those topics that I think a lot of men want to discuss with their wives or their girlfriends, but they don't know how to go about it because it's a touchy subject, right? And so they don't want feelings hurt or whatever it may be. And so I think having this conversation now today on this call is giving men the words to say, really, on how to not confront, but how to sit down with your spouse and be like, hey, these are my needs. What are your needs? Let's help each other out. Because that's really what it is. It's a partnership. You're doing life together. It's a partnership. And so if your husband's needs are, I need sex 4 times a week. Okay, what are my needs? My needs are this. So let's work together because we are together. We are one. Let's work together to make sure that those needs are met.
Yeah. I think you come at it from the perspective of, we're doing this life together until we die, right? We have 20, 30, 50 or more years together. And if we have this roadblock, this fork of separation of communication on sex, right? Whether it's sex, money, kids. So these things are like vitally important things. And sex a lot of times will blow up a marriage after a certain amount of time. So if you come at it from the perspective of, babe, let's have this conversation to get on the same page about some of these, big things, because I want us to literally be together until the end. So we need a plan. We need to express our needs, both sides, on these kind of things. So I think this is how I would approach this conversation if you're the man initiating it. Men, I think, are very direct and want to say, hey, babe, like, let's just do it. Let's have more sex, right? Like, I'm horny, like, we should be doing it. And I don't think women understand that. They do not have the same sexual drive that men have most often. And they have completely different other biological, physical, and emotional needs. So when we express our needs to you, I think it just goes right over your head. And when you express your needs to us, it goes right over our heads, and we don't necessarily relate. So I think here's how I would approach this as a man. You can't just be as blunt and as direct as you want. When you're talking to your guys, they understand what you're saying because they're also dudes, right? You can just be like, hey, here's what I want to do. I'm horny. We should do it, right? Like, we got plenty of time. The kids are going to be fine. Like, let's go and do our thing. And a woman doesn't understand. You're speaking different languages. So I would kind of approach it in this way in order to not speak your man language, but to come to the same perspective of let's get on the same page at the end of talking about needs, right? You kind of shared that, but I want to say that this is what I would say is let's discuss my needs as a man. Let's discuss your needs as a woman. And my objective as a man is more sex, right? That's the point of this conversation. How do I get more sex, right? I think men want respect, appreciation for their hard work, and they want sex. That's kind of it, right? Like, if you want to just simplify things and dumb it down, I would say that's the core of it, right? There's definitely more, but the core of it, DNA-wise, in our biological needs is that. And women have different needs. So if we can both get on the same page of here's my needs, here's your needs, now how do we, coming from that conversation, now we at least have an understanding of each other's needs and to certain degrees. Now how do we move forward? If this objective is let's make this last, all the way till we die.
I think it's so interesting when I think about, the married couples that I see in my life, and you say sex and respect. So if most men aren't getting sex in their marriage, and to be completely frank with you, majority of the marriages I see do not have respect in there either. So it's almost like those two cups that need to be filled in men's lives are empty. And it's an interesting thing when you actually are more aware of the relationships around you and you see what's going on and you're like, oh, that's not good. Like, oh, that sting that wife just said to the man, that was so disrespectful. Like, I hope I never say something like that. But I think the woman doesn't even realize she's doing it. And the man is so used to it and they're just like numb to it. At least that's how I see a lot of marriages. They're just numb to each other and all their cups are empty and they're not filling any of their cups at all. And so, and because probably they've never talked about it, maybe they don't know how to. And so this is why I think this conversation is so important. And I'm excited to talk about it because the way that you talk about your hunger and such like that for sex is definitely something I think that most women can understand. And so giving men this, I guess, like tool in their tool belt to use will be very helpful.
Well, so then let's talk about your needs. As a lady, what are your needs? Sexual is part of it, but then maybe on a more holistic perspective, if the objective is how do we make this marriage 50, 60 years, from that perspective, right? Sex is definitely part of it, but there's going to be other things that are really important to you. What would that look like?
Yeah, since I kind of want to make it easy, since you said, sex and respect, I really do think for women, yes, sex is involved in that too. I don't want women listening to this being like, I am just as horny as my husband is. Yes, I'm sure you probably are. There are some women out there who have a very large sex drive. But for, I would say majority of women, it would be love and provision and protection would be the basis. And I think a lot of women even hearing that makes them cringe because of this cultural, I guess, weight that is put on women that like you need to be that independent woman. And yes, I can go out there and I can start my own business and I can be a single mom and I can do it all on my own. I don't need a man. Like I think a lot of women say that now. And to hear those words of love, provision, protection is like cringing, right? And making them cringe. But I really do think that you said biologically men need sex and respect or sex. I think biologically women need that provision and they need that protection and they don't even realize it. I think that you can't really put into words sometimes what your needs are until you get in conversations like this, which I think is really important to have with your significant other. Because a lot of times, like, I think first time you asked me, like, what are your needs? And I'm like, I don't know, just love me and kiss me and, tell me I'm beautiful and touch me every now and again. Like, it was like, I don't know. Like, I don't really know any. I've never been asked that question before. So I think it can be kind of like abrupt to hear that question from your significant other and you don't really know how to answer it. But I think if you think about it, those will probably be the basis of what women need are those things: love, provision, protection, and sex. And so I think doing this, sitting down and having this conversation with your significant other will allow you to actually feel what you need, because sometimes you don't even think about it. It's like the last thing in our mind being as women. We're like thinking about the kids and the house and everything else, right? It's like our needs come last sometimes. And so being able to vocalize those needs is vital in your relationship.
For sure. And I agree. I think it's hard if somebody asks you that directly, hey, what are your needs? Like, I don't know. But if you reworded it and maybe you said, what do we need to be successful in our marriage? Right? Like or maybe if I as a husband said, what do I need to do or to be in order to be successful as a husband? You may come at it that question and be able to answer that and say, well, you know what? I need you to contribute in this way with the kids. And I want you to be the primary breadwinner. I want you to carry that financial burden. I want you to set us up for retirement. I want you to take care of me in this way, spend this much time with me, take me out this often. I want sex this much, right? I want you to do this during sex, right? If you were going to be a rock star, perfect husband, this is what my dream list would be. Mm. And maybe it's a little easier. What do you think about that question?
Yeah, I could think that would be a little easier. But then you don't want to make your husband feel like he's like hasn't hit any of those things that you're saying. He's like, oh crap, you know? But I guess that's the whole point of the conversation, right? Is to be open and honest and not get feelings hurt, I think is important to say. I think coming from the woman's side, I think men, to be honest, don't really get their feelings hurt that often. At least you don't. Women have a tendency to have their feelings hurt a little more often. I think they just take it more personal, right? And so I think having saying it in that way, I think would be a little easier to answer. And to be honest, I think would be a little bit easier for the opposite person to digest and understand.
Okay, so as a man, if you said all these kind of things, this is the way I look at it. It's like, here's a checklist. If I am doing this and this and this and this, then I get more sex. Like, no problem. I got that. We'll double down, right? I can get all these things done by 10 p.m. and we are ready to rumble, girl. Like,
yeah.
I think if you can just ask, as a man, right? If you can ask these questions and don't be sneaky or like trying to be manipulative, but come at it literally from the perspective of how do I have a 50-year marriage? Mm-hmm. And it's for me to do my part to provide for you, to meet your needs. And then if you're honestly, and if you take the first steps and maybe you don't express your needs for sex, right? If you just ask this one-sided and then start implementing it, mm-hmm. maybe you follow up later with a secondary conversation. Babe, how are we doing? I'm working on these things, that kind of things. Hey, you know what? Here's some of the things that I need, right? My needs. And perhaps they are more sexual driven. Perhaps they are more, respect or appreciation. I think if you can come from this perspective as a kind of template for a man, it's kind of a slow play, but I think it's a very good way to go.
I think that's too much work for men. They're like, forget it. That's too much.
No way. It is for sure not. Come at it from, a lot of men are like, no sex for once a month, stuff like that, right? Like,
awful. Yeah.
Men are like, I'll try anything. I can do that.
Well, I think what kind of throws a wrench in this whole thing is the way that women are created with the hormone tendencies that they have that fluctuate up and down, and especially, hitting that pre-menopause period in their life, early 40s to early 50s. It's difficult because I could tell you all the things that I need, but I think that it changes so much mm-hmm. because of that. And so I think that's where there needs to be more open conversations and communications between, your spouse and yourself, because if there's a certain point in your life where like it's just different, then that needs to be spoken, right? Yeah. So I think that's hard because a man just wants like a checklist. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, I'll do those 5 things. Okay, ready. Boom, ching, and it's right. Like, well, if it's like that time of the month or something, like it's not going to be that easy. It's a little different. So it all just comes down to communicating and literally just telling them how you're vibing and feeling that day.
Yeah. So, men, you don't get a magic wand here, right?
Yeah.
And I would come from this perspective. We started saying men are biologically driven to procreate, and it's been that way for thousands of years. You can think of it from the same way from a lady's perspective. It's literally dangerous for women getting pregnant and having birth in all of eternity up until about like 100, 150 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Like death during childbirth was one of a huge risk factor. And, as you get later into your 30s and 40s, right, that increases so much more. So on the biological level, again, women are, not made the same way sexually as men for good reason, for protection for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. Because it was dangerous for most of humankind. So you're not going to get, as a man, right? You're not going to get a man, right? You're not marrying a man. You're not trying to do that. But at least you can get on the same page with your spouse and express both sides. Here are my needs. Here's how we can be successful for the long term. So one analogy that I think is really applicable, and when we were having this conversation, because we've had this conversation in order for me to get more sex, I've used this analogy about hunger. And I think it's pretty applicable. So I consider it like this. If everyone understands what it feels like to be hungry, right? It's that biological feeling of like, I gotta get food inside me, right? I'm like at this growing urge to eat. And the longer you go without food, the more this hunger increases, right? If you were, let's just say like an athlete, right? And you're working, it's football and it's 2 days and all that kind of stuff when you're a young man, like you're expressing lots of energy and your hunger grows much faster than than someone who's not expressing that type of energy, right? Like if you considered, right, like a lady who's just kind of hanging out, sitting around all day, she's going to eat and have this hunger so much less than this young man we're talking about, right? So the analogy, I think, is that kind of way. There is a clear difference, and there's exceptions, but there's a clear difference between men and women with their drive for sex, right? It may be 3 times the amount, right? Like that I get hungrier 3 times faster, or I need 3 times more food than someone else. And for me, I can't control that. Like it doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me horny or a dog that I get hungry that often, right? Like I'm expressing a lot of energy. I'm doing the thing that I'm made to do, and therefore I need to refill my belly, right? And it's not a bad thing for your spouse, for a lady, to not be as hungry in this analogy, right? Like you shouldn't get on your wife or your girlfriend for not having that physical need. It's totally different, right? One versus the other. And I think if you can come at it, and at least from a man's perspective, you can explain it in this way, and at least tell your spouse, your wife, girlfriend, like, hey, like this is my needs, right? Like I'm getting hungry 3 times faster than you, right? Or it may be 1-to-1 or whatever that is. But it was something a conversation that we had to be able to express, like, this is my normal, right? Like I need to eat this often, right? I need to have sex this often. And this is just me being me. And I know that you're not me. You have different needs. But I at least want to get on the same page with these things.
You also mentioned another analogy. He's created a lot of analogies for me so that I understand. It was a bladder analogy. And what I like about it is because we, as human beings, we all have to pee, right? We all drink liquids and we all pee these liquids out. And so we all have bladders and they all get full with liquid, and we need to expel the liquid out of our bladder. And so Brett was giving me the analogy of, when I need to go, like it's almost like my bladder is full of urine and it hurts almost like when you're in a car ride when you're, going out for the weekend, road tripping or something, right? And you're like, I have to pee so bad, but the next exit is like 20 miles down the road. You're like, dang it. And every bump is like, oh gosh, like it hurts. And Brett's like, it's like that when I need to have sex. I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible. Like it really, it's the urge and the hurt, like it hurts that bad. And he's like, yeah. And so I'm like, okay, well, I guess that makes sense because it's a biological thing that we both can experience and we both know what it feels like. And so that was the best way for him to kind of paint that picture for me so that I understood that it's very similar. When your testes are full and you need to get it out, it's like your bladder's full. And so I kind of had that understanding. It really solidified in my mind after you said that. And it made sense to me that, okay, like it's a biological need that he needs, that most men need. And if this is my husband, if this is my partner, this is someone who, we're doing life together, like I want to help fulfill his needs. And so it was just a conversation. And a lot of times this conversation happens more than once. We've experienced it, and that's okay. It's always like a little refresher. Like, hey babe, like the bladder's full. Like,
right. We've had this conversation probably 5 or 6 times,
yeah, 5 or 6
if
times.
not more.
Yeah.
Right. Uh-huh. And we'll get on the same page. You'll understand. And then you kind of forget. And then we have the conversation again. And I feel like we're having it for the first time a lot of times. And it's like, oh, really? Was that what you meant by that? I'm like, yeah, babe, we've talked about this like 3 times.
So I think having analogies, I think really, for me personally helps. And I think for most women would help too as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us in another episode of The Donkey and the Bee. Men, make sure to talk to your wife about getting more sex, but make sure that you are fulfilling her needs. Have this open, honest conversation about how to have a successful marriage, sex included. We appreciate you joining us. We will see you on the next one.